Welcome to Ride to Success, the podcast that takes you on a learning journey to a more productive, creative, and active life. In the podcast, I explore cycling's global trends, community needs, and innovative business strategies. Today, on Ride to Success, I chatted with Dr. Fiona Spotswood, an associate professor in marketing and consumption at the University of Bristol, whose work is steering the course toward gender inclusivity in mountain biking and action sports. Dr. Fiona's dedication to fostering inclusive action sports shines through a pivotal project called Fostering Inclusive Action Sports, aimed to break down the barriers and build a more welcoming community for women and non-binary individuals in these traditionally male-dominated fields. Join me in this learning journey as Dr. Fiona shares her insights on the transformative power of inclusivity in action sports. Before we get into the podcast, I just want to say that sometimes I get things wrong. During my conversation with Dr. Fiona, I asked a question I wish I didn't. But Dr. Fiona, with clarity, taught me why that's the wrong question to be asking and what we can do to change the narrative. So without further ado, back to the podcast. Welcome, Fiona, to Ride Success. It's a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. You are an academic and an activist, and you have a passion for mountain biking. I myself, I'm not a mountain biker, but I come from a place of curiosity. Through learning from your research, the work you've been doing into inclusivity in action sports and mountain biking, I think it's relevant to speak because it reaches, the work that you do reaches much wider audience than just mountain biking. And having said that, I kind of wanted to read one of the quotes that you wrote that from the findings from the research that we'll be talking in a minute. But I think this quote is relevant because it will create the frame for what we will be discussing. So it reads like this. Women mountain bikers face unique experiences of exclusion. Their engagement with the sport is brokered by men. This creates pressure and exacerbates feelings of imposter syndrome, fear, and anxiety. So, like I mentioned before, I think this is a very powerful message, a very powerful few sentences here that are not limiting to mountain biking. You can apply it to other action sports, women's sports at large, perhaps. And I wanted to first understand a bit more of your own experiences, because this is from your findings from the research that you've been doing. We'll talk in a bit. But from your experience, you clearly have a passion for mountain biking. So I wanted to try and understand that personal journey of yours. What initially drew you to mountain biking, and how you grew, through your own learning process as well, your own experiences.
Okay, so I think it's a good quote. It's a good one to pick from the research. I would say probably the most important caveat to that quote is that not all women are the same, and you can't lump them all together. Women have, but that said, I think the research, which we'll talk about later, the research shows that women often have very different experiences to men in action sports, including mountain biking, and and that speaks to my own experience. I actually don't feel anxiety in riding in mixed groups, and I've often and always, in fact, ridden with men. So most of my research findings are not appropriate to me. They're not relevant to me. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean anything. I'm just one person with one set of unique experiences, and in a way, my own background in mountain biking, because it's been it's very different to what I see in the research findings. It makes me question and ask probing questions, and make sure I'm really understanding what I'm hearing, because what I'm hearing is not necessarily my own experiences. And that's fine. I mean, that's very common in research. We can't expect our own personal journey to reflect what we find out. So personally, I started mountain biking over 20 years ago. I was introduced to it by a male friend, which is very common. Particularly, I think now it's becoming more likely that you might be introduced to mountain biking by a woman, but realistically there are still so few women mountain biking in comparison to men. It's very, very common story that people get introduced by men. So that was my
Yeah,
experience.
sure.
A good friend who I used to run with, I did lots of other sports, I did road cycling and triathlon, and he said, I think you'd like mountain biking, and took me out to the Quantocks in the southwest of England. And quite honestly, I hated it. It was difficult. It was nothing like road cycling. I kept falling off. It was really scary. I remember throwing my bike at him and shouting expletives at him on a descent and just thinking, I just don't get it. I like the idea of this sport. I like the idea of zipping along a beautiful trail with amazing views. But the reality is that it's just really tough. And it took me quite a while before I found the passion and found it. And it's a very skill-based sport. So it's all about at the moment that you get a sufficient amount of skills to be able to ride safely, and then you feel this incredible flow, and there's just nothing like it. Yeah.
Can you expand a bit more about if you clearly this was a relationship that took time to develop?
Yeah.
What was your experience of being introduced by a male friend, but coming to a male-dominated sport?
Yeah.
What was your experience in taking part in perhaps group rides or events, organized events?
I was always the only woman, and I was lucky in some ways that once I'd found my feet in mountain biking, I got it pretty quickly. So I went from zero to hero, if you like. I was pretty strong from other sports, and I was tough. I quite liked the performance anxiety. I quite liked the pressure. I quite liked being different and being the only woman. Quite like the feeling of being, arriving at, screeching to Monday morning and going to work and feeling completely beaten up by some huge ride that we'd done at the weekend. And I didn't know any other women who mountain biked. And to my shame, I didn't really question it. It made me feel a bit special. But also my route into mountain biking was through racing. So I think there weren't the opportunities then that there are now of non-competitive, just participatory rides, people coming together to ride their bikes in the woods.
Yeah.
And it's really strange now. So 25 years on, I'm my mid-40s, and the thought of racing my bike is the strangest thing in the world. I couldn't imagine why I'd ever want to do that. It's so far from my relationship with mountain biking now. Like now I ride with a group of friends, different groups of friends. I ride with my children. I ride with in women's groups. I ride in mixed groups. And it's just about having a good time, sharing a moment, challenging myself. I still push myself hard. I want to be the first up that hill, and I want to be able to do the big jump on the way down. But it's, it's about the crack. It's about connecting with other people and connecting with, with nature. But back in the beginning, it was about racing, and I was fit and I could do it. And so I quickly embedded myself in male-dominated groups because I could keep up. And of course, that's a very unique experience. And I'm the sort of person that doesn't mind that kind of pressure, but I absolutely recognize the fact that that is a pretty horrific experience for a lot of women. It only worked because I was fit and strong, and it wasn't a relaxing experience. It was fine for me at that time in my life. But if that was me now, I would hate it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe that's perhaps has to do with the fact that you're younger, like more competitive, your competitive streak, your fitness, all played together in like kind of driven approach to just go and try something new and be the best at it. But it's also interesting that you mentioned about kind of the very narrow focus that you had. You came into a new sport and you just thought competition. That's the only kind of approach to it. I will learn it. I'll be the best at it that I can. Because that kind of very nicely actually brings us to one of the main topics of our conversation. You mentioned through your research, fostering inclusive action sports, that there is an overly narrow representation of mountain
Yeah.
biking in media and marketing that is dominated by a masculine, risky, high-octane style of
Yeah.
engagement.
Yeah.
And this kind of, from what you just said, you kind of have transitioned, perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have transitioned from that where you saw yourself as, this is what it is, mountain biking. That's how I fit into this new sport that I'm trying, to where you are now, where you don't see, where you just said you completely feel a bit alien to the idea of doing a race, and you see it more as a community aspect, and more of the bringing people together, having a great time on the bike,
I think
sharing it.
I don't agree. Actually, I
Okay.
think my transition, as you describe it, is from cross country racing, which is what it was then. Mountain biking has changed
Okay.
enormously. Bikes have changed. Don't forget. So the technology of bikes allowed and enabled a different way of riding to be accessible by just punters like me. Whereas it used to just be downhillers who had the best rigs, who could ride the most technical trails. Now anyone owns the trail bike and can ride much more technical, steep things. Whereas 20 years ago, it was much harder. So I used to
Okay.
race cross country. Well, it was endurance cross country, so it was 24 hours, but it wasn't very technical.
Oh.
So it was long distance, but it wasn't jumping, and it wasn't
Okay.
particularly techie. Now I don't have the time. I've got 3 children. I don't have the time to race long distances or ride long distances as much as I'd love to. But I do have the bike that enables me to ride much more technical trails than I've ever done before. So the transition is happening at multiple different ways in the sport, and I think that's quite a common experience, to be honest. Also, the participation of mountain biking, it just wasn't possible. There weren't the opportunities 20 years ago to ride in groups, particularly groups of women. That's a really recent phenomenon. There were really no groups of women coming together to ride. There were groups of men with the odd occasional woman who turned up, and that, me being one of them. But essentially it was, it just wasn't the same culture. And I see that in the research that we've done with women who are similar age to me or a bit older. They can see as well that they came into mountain biking through men, raced. It was a very competitive kind of environment. And over the years, gradually, they discovered riding with other women. And it's quite a new, like a community, grassroots oriented change. And places like Canada, Whistler, they're streets ahead. They've been doing this for generations. They'll get 50, 60 women riding at a weekend on a women's weekend.
Okay.
And we didn't ever have that. And it's still it's still a minority, but that is growing. That is something that's growing, particularly because of social and digital media. People can find each other, connect, and tell different stories about the sport, and come together and go, we can go out and ride however we want to ride. So when I talk about, in the research, when I talk about this narrow, hypermasculine, high octane representation of the sport, I'm not talking about racing. I'm talking about the white man doing a big jump in a full face helmet. And that is part of the sport. It's really exciting. I love it. I love putting my full face helmet on and going to Bike Park Wales and getting as much air as I can. It's a fantastic, exciting, thrilling part of the sport. I'm not trying to cancel it at all. But what our research tells us is that that bikes are not, mountain biking is not represented in a diverse way. So it's that or nothing. Because media and marketing are so entangled in mountain bike representation, it's all about selling that expensive bike. So there is a tendency not to show the gorgeous after work ride, chilled out ride through the woods that ends in the pub. And also there is a tendency not to show groups of women riding or women at all. Sometimes people of different colours. It's very white, male-dominated, high-octane, jumping kind of sport, represented in the media, which doesn't do it justice. And so what we find is that men don't care because they're not minoritized. They see that and go, "Oh, that's exciting! Great, I'll go and ride and see what happens. Women are, they have a different history. They are, sport generally speaking is wrapped up as male, and this narrow representation of the sport presents an image that speaks to women with the message that you have to do it in this way or you're not doing it properly. And so women compare themselves to that. They struggle to connect with the sport. Women who are already mountain bikers, we find, struggle to connect with the sport, and they think, well, I'm scared. That person in that magazine is not looking scared, and I don't know how to be scared. Am I allowed? Is that okay? So we have a lot of research findings that tell us women kind of feel like they're not a proper mountain biker. They don't really class themselves a mountain biker, or they feel they're a bit awkward, or they don't look right, or they're not doing it properly. They're not just owning it because they don't see themselves in the media.
Interesting.
And that's a problem. And then obviously from the outside, you have the recruitment problem. So a lot of the, we don't see mountain biking in the Guardian or the BBC that often. It's very, it's a minority sport. It's a niche.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not represented out there. And so actually, and also you don't see it. You can't look out your window and see mountain bikers. They're off being weird in the woods. And so the only thing we know, the only thing that teenage girls know about what mountain biking is through the media representation that makes it through to Google. And that is generally Red Bull, and it's generally men. Yeah. So you talk to teenage girls and they say, well, I couldn't try mountain biking because you have to be really good at it before you can try it, which is completely illogical. So, they can imagine themselves getting on a road bike and going for a short ride. They can't imagine themselves getting on a mountain bike and going for a chilled bimble in the woods, because all they know of mountain biking is that it's massive jumps, really scary, super dangerous, and dominated by men. And so why on earth would you imagine that you could try that? So we've got work to do. So that's really as a long-winded answer, but that's what I'm trying. That's what we're getting at in the research.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. It just kind of gives a good overview of the work you have been doing. So you obviously explained your motivations in the findings from the research. But what led you to the point where you wanted to start the research?
So my career, I'm a associate professor of marketing and consumption, and my career hasn't always I haven't always researched sport. In fact, this is pretty much, it's not the first time, but generally speaking, I look at physical activity and exercise inequalities. So I spent actually most of my career I've spent with people who are not active at all. So it's not about sport, it's about inactivity. My background is social marketing, which is using marketing to change behavior. So it's been all about understanding why there are groups, population level groups of people who don't have good relationships with sport, with physical activity and exercise. So I've done research about running, and I've done research about weightlifting, both of which I do. But that's not not why. That isn't that wasn't the motivation for doing the research. It was what I'm interested in is the consumption of sport and physical activity, and increasingly interested in exclusion. So why is it that some groups of people are able to have wonderful, joyful, lifelong relationships with sport that just, fill their lives with people and incredible experiences and wonderful views and of course, great health generally. Yeah, exactly, I mean, sport isn't always good for us. Like, we'd sometimes take it too far, etc., etc. But if you have a good, healthy, balanced relationship with sport and physical activity, it sets you up with a coping mechanism, a way of dealing with mental health and pressure, and also, obviously, the physical health benefits. And it's not fair. It's not socially equal. It's very socially patterned. So I've done a lot of work around social class, motherhood. I've done a lot of research around motherhood and physical activity. And I was interested in action sport. So action sport, we used to call them lifestyle sports or adventure sports. They tend to use the phrase action sport now. But sports that aren't institutionalized. So they're not like, you don't join a club, like a hockey club or a football club, and then you get coached and you get told the rules and you get told what to wear and you get immediately included in a team or a training schedule. Or mountain biking, surfing, climbing, they're not like that. There are no, I mean, there are some institutionalized bits of the sports. You know, they're often they're in the Olympics these days, but on the ground, it's very informal, it's very subcultural, it's very invisible. And so the media and marketing side, therefore, is disproportionately important because you don't have those.
Exactly. Yeah.
So from a marketing consumption researcher's perspective, it's fascinating how the ideas that we have about what is surfing or what is climbing, what is mountain biking, they are constructed partly by marketing and media and partly by what happens on the ground. And if marketing and media is male dominated and hyper masculine, it is changing, by the way. I'm sure we'll talk about that. It's not all a negative picture. There are some really good pockets of amazing transformative work going on in the mainstream media, in the mountain biking media.
Yeah.
But if the cultural representation doesn't show everything that mountain biking can be and doesn't have a lovely culturally diverse representation of mountain bikers with all different types of bikes, all different types of body shapes and genders and skin colors, if we don't do that, then the only other way that we know how to mountain bike is if we're doing it. And we know that 80% or more, depending on the stats you look at, 80% of mountain bikers are men. And so we're stuck in this place where I think mountain biking and other action sports that are in nature, that are, you know, community oriented, they offer so much to people. And quite honestly, it's just not fair that, you know, girls are growing up thinking that they can't do it. So
So I mean, it points to the misrepresentation and the need to be a more kind of a more strategic approach to it.
Yes.
So the work that you've been doing through the research, what do you aim to get out of it? So you've talked at length through what you have found. What is the kind of the proposed outcomes that you want to? How do you want to change through these research?
So
the current situation.
The original the empirical research was about 2 years worth of work with my colleague Martin Hercombe, who's at the university as well, the University of Bristol. And that led to us getting a follow-on grant. So that was funded by the British Academy, and that research enabled us to get a follow-on grant from the Policy Support Fund, which has enabled us to write what we call the FIAS framework. So FIAS stands for Fostering Inclusive Action Sport, and it's the FIAS framework. The framework in its first iteration is targeted at policy level organisations in cycling and outdoors. So we have 5 partners on the project. So the International Mountain Bike Association, British Cycling, Welsh Cycling, Scottish Cycling, whose mountain bike part is called Dimbins, Developing Mountain Biking in Scotland, and Forestry England. And those policy level partners, we're targeting them first because they have a role to play in the cultural representation of mountain biking. They've got a big reach, they have a marketing angle, but also they have the opportunity to run programs, develop funding streams, and so on, that enable women to not only support women's communities of mountain bikers, which we know is really important, but also to integrate women, enable women to integrate into all levels of mountain bike culture. And so we don't want to end with a situation where all we're doing is we recognize the amazing energy that comes from women riding together. And so we throw everything at that and go, let's create more opportunities for women to ride together without tackling male dominated mountain bike culture. So the framework, the FIAS framework, looks at how to support women only, women led, or women plus, as we call it, communities of mountain bikers, but also look at, you know, changes in the cultural representation of mountain biking, in how women can be involved in leadership in mountain biking and cycle sport at all levels, and also in terms of integrating women into all the rest of mountain bike culture, making sure women feel welcome at events, making sure women are part of the events organising teams, that they're able to turn up to races and not feel minoritized, that they're able to go to trail centres and have, you know, the loos they need, the facilities they need, that they're not minoritized or marginalized in mountain bike culture. Because we don't want to end with a situation where women are doing women's mountain biking and then men are doing proper mountain biking. This is absolutely not where we want to go.
Yeah.
So it's about
Yeah, that's a
integration
good
and
point.
transformation through, as you
Mhm.
say, a strategic approach. And our partners have been fantastic. And the rollout after that is obviously working with many, many more organisations at all levels who have a part to play. They might not be able to do everything or look at all parts of the framework, but they might be like, well, we have a voice in this. We're marketing, we've got a marketing angle, we're a brand. Let's look at this framework and see what we can do to challenge, address, and transform the cultural representation of mountain biking in our way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So I
that's
mean,
what we're doing with it.
yeah, that's a good answer. Very good answer. I wanted to pick on that because you earlier on you mentioned about the fact that mountain biking, like other action sports, is not very
Yeah,
institutionalized.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
In comparison to, let's say,
Football.
women's
Yeah,
football or women's
yeah,
hockey.
yeah.
So seems to be a bit of perhaps a paradox here, where you're working with these institutions, like you said, British Cycling, Welsh Cycling, and
Mm-hmm.
so on. But at the lower level, perhaps how can you bridge the gap? Is that a response in terms of the institution creating that space for women to feel included into the mountain biking, not feel that there is the real mountain biking, as you said, and then the women's mountain biking?
Yeah,
Is
I don't say it's a paradox at all, because
okay.
British Cycling are, well, actually, British Cycling do have some women-only mountain bike groups, the Breeze Rides. In
Mhm.
England, they're not really, they're not so much mountain biking focused, but in Wales they really are. And Scotland as well. They have Breeze into the Forest. They're women's mountain bike groups that are supported and set up by British Cycling. But generally speaking, these large policy level organisations, they're not going to start women's mountain bike clubs. That's not what the
Yeah.
framework is suggesting at all. It's about
Okay.
them taking a leadership position. And, I'll give you one example. And this is something that Scottish Cycling already does. So we know that women are reticent to, or nervous about, or reluctant often to go from being a rider to a volunteer leader. So that jump feels, women struggle with sense of legitimacy. I'm not good enough. Am I good enough to then train as a leader and do my mountain bike leader qualification? Now, I've done that qualification, and I was the only woman on the group, and I was taught by a man. And as we talked about my personal history, that didn't bother me, but I recognised that it could. And we
Yeah.
know a lot of women who ride in groups, whether they're mixed groups or women only groups, they could take that leap and go and train as a mountain bike leader. And therefore you are expanding the number of women who are in leadership positions, voluntary leadership positions, and those teenage girls, those women who haven't tried it yet could go, okay, so there's a woman leading this group. Okay, well that's a
Okay.
different ball game. I'm way too
Yeah.
nervous to turn up to a group that's led by men, dominated by men. But I didn't realize you could go and join groups that are led by women, trained leaders. So it's really important that we produce pathways where women ride, they volunteer, they train as leaders, they train other people, they become tutors, and that we have women at all levels in mountain biking. They're running the kids clubs, they're commissaires at the races, they're at every level. And at the moment, it's not just riders that we're interested in, it's making sure that women are integrated at all levels. Now in Scotland, they have this amazing mentorship scheme that's called something like From Rider to Leader. And it mentors
Okay.
women and helps them bridge that gap. But it isn't
Right.
everywhere. So it could be everywhere. There could be ways, mechanisms that we could ensure that there are more women tutors, more women delivering the training and the assessments for the leadership training. That we actively publicize the training to women so that they can, and that the publicity materials shows women taking the courses, passing,
Yeah.
running kids clubs, running mountain bike groups with this qualification. And at the moment we don't do that. So that's a really relatively simple way of ensuring that women are involved in, and it's not just about recruiting women to become mountain bikers. It's about recruiting women into all levels of mountain biking. So this isn't institutionalizing the sport, because mountain bikers don't like being organized. They're never going to join clubs. They will join WhatsApp groups. We know that. It's a subculture. So it's not about changing the dynamics of mountain biking. It's still going to be, largely informal groups meeting, riding the trails. But what we can do is instill a sense of a bit of infrastructure, a bit of opportunity to that, to enable women to feel part of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I run a kids club in Bristol with a man, 2 of us run it. We've always had 3 male mountain bike leaders and me. So that's been the ratio. But through our active involvement, we've now recruited, they're going in April. The 4 new leaders are being trained in their fundamentals mountain bike leadership qualification, 3 of whom are women and 1 of whom is man. So they were people who came into the club just as parents, or we rode with.
That's amazing.
Who were just interested, and we sort of spoke to them and said, it would be great. Would you be a brilliant mountain bike leader? Had you thought about it? And they were, well, I'd love to. Do you think I can? Absolutely, of course you can. And then now they're going off to get trained. And so we will then have all these new cohort of kids coming into our club with gender parity at the leader level. So for those boys, they will see that mountain biking is for grown-up women, and those girls will have women as role models. And so you can start to change the dynamics going forward through the in the future of the sport for those people.
Yeah, that's very important. Making the change at grassroots level so that young girls can have a role model, and then create that path is a bit more clear in terms of what can be achieved through following that sport.
But you say make the change at grassroots level, definitely. But you need the programs of support available to make that happen. So British Cycling or whoever it is can help make it change at grassroots level by advertising that they've got women tutors on their leadership training, and advertising specifically to women in mountain bike clubs and groups. So it is grassroots, but it's got to be supported by those organizations, which is what we're getting at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does show the scope of the work that the research you're doing, the collaboration that you've been establishing with these organizations. It makes me think as well the importance as well of groups of women taking their own to themselves, to opening up doors to other women, to welcoming them into the sport.
Definitely.
Like you have been doing with on your own, the children mountain biking club, but also through, I can think of Limitless Festival, which is amazing. I've interviewed Fiona and Katie, the 2/3 of the founders group, and they talk about as well their experience of wanting to welcome women that don't have an interest in mountain biking, but can see that there is a path forward into being welcomed into a community that they probably wouldn't see themselves as belonging to.
Definitely. Those groups like Limitless, Sisters in the Wild, the New Forest Off-Road Club, there's a whole host of organizations that have set up, often triggered by COVID. A lot of them are very new and was started in COVID, because there was a kind of nationwide recognition of the power of coming together to just ride bikes in beautiful places, and as I say, that this collective inclusive cultural shift in off-road cycling. It's not always mountain biking. A lot of that's gravel, but in off-road cycling generally, that this cultural shift is really recent. It wasn't there when I first started riding bikes, when I first started picked up a mountain bike, and it's new and it's open, and it's just a gorgeous way of engaging in the sport. You don't have to put a number on the front of your bike to ride with other people. You can do, nothing wrong with that, but there are lots of options now. So I think the media just hasn't quite caught up. Not, there are, as I said, there are places in the media which are really working hard to include different stories. And we always talk about the power of storytelling and how, it's so important for humans to have stories. It's how we understand things. We understand what things are about, what they're for, why they matter. And if the only stories we tell are about massive jumps and crashes and danger, then that's what we'll understand mountain biking to be. If we tell stories of adventure and connection and being together, coming together, supporting each other, including different people and learning from each other, we tell those stories, that is what it will be. And so, that's, you're beginning to see it. Like Single Track magazine is a great example. It's really shifting. There is obviously the paywall problem, because a lot of the great stuff they do is behind a paywall. That has to be, I get that. But, what we need to be able to do is to reach those teenage girls who at the moment don't think mountain biking is possible and it's off the radar. And it's really not. It's such an amazing sport to take part in.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that's I wanted to kind of explore a little bit as well, is that you have, obviously, mountain biking can be described, it can be defined in multiple ways depending on how you look at it. But I wanted to kind of dig a bit deeper into the research findings, into trying to understand what are the current, or through the research, what were the limitations that kind of were self-imposed by women, by young girls, and the limitations that the actual limitations of how the media portrays the sport, how the brands portray themselves to the customers, and is there two different kind of barriers of entry to the sport, or is this just some it blurs?
So I don't really understand what you mean by self-imposed barriers. I mean, there are barriers to mountain biking. Like, you need a mountain bike.
So
they're not cheap.
So what I meant by the self-imposed is, I think what you've talked about is, for instance, if I want to take part in mountain biking, yes, there's the physical, there's the monetary barriers to it, but there's also the confidence, being able to look up to a role model, being able to look up to
that's not
someone that I know. Sorry?
That's not self-imposed.
Okay. So how would you describe it?
If you describe a lack of confidence or a sense of like a lack of sense of possibility as self-imposed, you're basically blaming women for not taking part. And we hear that a lot.
Okay.
We hear it's like, well, they can if they want to. Why don't they just turn up? When race organisers only got a tiny amount of women entering a race, or groups can't recruit women, or brands can't recruit women, or they say, well, why don't they can come if they want to. But if you describe that or conceptualize that as self-imposed, you're blaming women for their lack of confidence, and therefore you're missing the whole cultural history of sport, and you're wiping out women's struggle to take part in sport at all levels throughout history. Society has told women they are too frail to take part in sport time and time again over the course of history, all different types of sport. Women have had to fight to take part in sports. They've had to lie. They've had to cheat their way onto the start line by pretending to be men. Women have not been validated as members of a sporting culture, a sporting physical culture. And yes, that is changing, and that's wonderful to see. But that history cannot be wiped out with a simple statement that women should be more confident. Why don't they just rock up? It's absolutely too simple. And so, women are always marginalized and minoritized in sport, which are two different things. And therefore, they have to fight to feel part of something. It is up to us as a community to shift sport and fix the system, not fix the woman. And women can take part if sport itself, if mountain biking itself changes and makes it an inclusive experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I didn't want to. Thanks for clarifying it. It makes it much clearer, and I
Yeah.
didn't meant to
No,
like
it's fine. But it's a
wipe brush off all
no,
of the history.
no. But
Just wanted to.
it's a useful
Yeah.
way of provoking the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the history and the battle that women had to face and still face to um, in the
Mm.
current day and age. What do you think brands still needs to do to make action sports in general, mountain bike
Mhm.
more specifically, more inclusive, more welcoming to women?
So it's tricky because I've spent a lot of time talking to brands and talking to journalists and publishers, and there's a catch-22 for them, which is that if you speak to a mainstream mountain bike magazine, they know that 87 to 95, 98 sometimes percent of their readership are men, and it's good marketing to target your audience. You know who your
Yeah.
audience is, and you speak to them. So what we go in and say when we're doing our research workshops, we say we want you to think about the audience you don't have, and that's really
Yeah.
tough for a business. And the cycling
Mm.
industry is in a tricky place at the
Yeah,
moment,
it
and it's
is.
a
Yeah.
tough ask to expect the industry to take a hit um, by and recognize their role in the transformation of mountain bike culture. It's a tough ask, but some people are doing it. So some
Yes. Yeah.
brands, media outlets are absolutely taking the lead and recognizing their responsibility and their role to play in cultural transformation. They want mountain biking to be different. They want it to be more inclusive. Quite honestly, it is good for business if you can engage
Yeah.
women. That's a huge potential audience. It's not just about activism. It's about
Yeah.
it's about being good. It's good for business.
Yeah.
And there
Definitely.
are
Yeah.
brands out
Mm.
there that are really focusing hard on investing their marketing spend, their marketing budget on bringing people together to ride bikes, bringing women together, but bringing different stories out. And I went recently to the new Kotick film Kelly that was launched in a bar in Sheffield, and it was such a wonderful occasion. They'd chosen to spend some of their marketing budget on producing a film that wasn't a shred it, that was focused on a woman and her child and how they incorporate off-road riding into their life. And it was predominantly men in the audience, but the conversation afterwards was so interesting. And there is an absolute thirst out there for people to have different stories to connect with. People,
Yeah.
it's really important, and it is happening. There are still brands that are, tell me we can't find women to ride bikes fast enough and make our bike look good enough. And it's very narrow,
Mm.
kind of narrow sense of legitimacy. They'll sponsor a woman because she can ride like a man, and they see that as progress. Whereas actually, what people are really, I think, after is just a range of different stories. I always say, like, I love watching a shred it film. I love watching. It's addictive, watching amazingly skilled riders do incredible jumps and ride the hard line. It's free ride
Yeah.
and that whole scene is just absolutely wonderful. I never want that to stop. I really enjoy it, but I also want to be able to show my kids and show my friends that riding can be anything, and we just
Yeah.
don't. We're just not very good at that. I had a really interesting conversation with Rafa, who obviously put on the Pennine Rally, which is a big,
Yeah.
community event, a celebration of cycling, and it's such a wonderful event. And I spoke to Louis about it, who organises it, and he said, we want to tell different stories of riding, so different stories of cycling. So we bring people together, give them an adventure, and then the stories come out of that. And I thought that was a really nice way of thinking about it. You've got to bring people together, and it's about people coming together to ride bikes. That's the most important thing. I call it the joy hierarchy. It's not about the bike; it's always about the adventure. And if we can tell different stories of adventure in different ways, then we will shift the culture of mountain biking, and more people, different people, will come into it.
Yeah, that's a very important message, what you just said. It's about measuring in terms of joy, measuring, being able to open mountain biking so that it is for everyone. It can mean anything. It doesn't have to be a specific thing, specific segment. And also the fact as well that you mentioned about brands needing to invest. So they might not see the same return in investment that they will see by investing in men's, but they are creating, like I've seen with other brands sponsoring women's events, giving a platform for women's. It creates a massive opportunity for role models, for visibility, for recognition.
And I don't think there's any evidence that they won't get return on investment either. I think that's a myth.
Okay.
I don't think there's any evidence for that at all. So I think it's, it's really clear there are parts of the industry who really absolutely understand the role they have in mountain bike culture, and then there are brands who think they're there to sell stuff, and of course they are there to sell stuff, but they have a bigger part to play, and you can see it. You can see the difference.
So, having said that, what does success look like for you?
Well, we've built a whole set of really clear goals into the framework. So that'll be available fairly soon, so you can have a look for yourself. I won't read them all. I won't read them all out. But I want, I guess it can be boiled down into a sense of, I think about my children. So I've got a 5-year-old girl, my youngest. I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. And, they have an unusual, fairly unusual existence in that they mountain bike all the time, which isn't that common for children. But I would like children like them to grow up, girls like them to grow up into a world where adventure sports, action sports are absolutely on the table. And there is a sense of possibility and opportunity for all sport at all levels for them. And that they think they can make it, they feel they can make a career in sport, either as athletes, managers, leaders, policy, at any level. And that there are no barriers, gender-based barriers. And that they feel like the world is their oyster when it comes to all forms of sport, particularly action sport. That for me would be a success.
Very good. Yeah, it's important. So I've started the tradition in the podcast, where every guest leaves a question to my next guest, not knowing who they are. And so the question that was left for you is the following: where do you see innovation and progression in the cycling industry?
In the cycling industry?
Yes.
Okay. Well, for me, it's got to be, I'm going to take that question as
for sure.
Relevant to cultural transformation, cultural representation. And I think that would be the most progressive innovation we could do, is for brands, marketing, media to shift how they understand mountain biking and to think about it in much more diverse terms. One of our participants said to me, and it's really important to know that this participant raced enduro in the World Series. So she is a totally skilled, proper high octane rider. And she said it makes her so sad when she sees yet another shredded image of a white male doing something amazing on a bike. And she said, we just haven't got it out there that bikes can be anything. And I go back to that all the time. We need to show people that bikes can be anything. We love cycling. Once you're in mountain biking, you find a very welcoming place. But from the outside, it doesn't look very welcoming. And it's got an image problem. And so the biggest innovation that I could see would be to shift how we understand the representation of the sport and feel like we are speaking to people who don't take part yet.
Very good. Very good answer. So with that, now is your turn to think of a question that you want my next guest to answer.
So I don't know who your next guest is.
No.
No. Okay. Well, it would be interesting to find out what they think the most important change could be to enable cycling to be more gender balanced.
Very good. With that, Fiona, thank you very much for sharing your insights. I'm sure this is going to provoke a good discussion.
Yeah.
And that's the aim of the research, to provoke thought-provoking, to make people think about what they can do as well, to make their own changes, and to bring more people, to bring more women into mountain biking, into action sports.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Nice to meet you. Take care.
What an insightful conversation. I hope you learned the systematic issues plaguing mountain biking at the moment. Dr. Fiona's dedication to making mountain biking and action sports at large more welcoming and accessible to all regardless of gender is inspiring to myself and to others to join the movement toward gender equality. Now, before you go, please remember to subscribe and review the podcast wherever you listen to it. Make sure you tune in to next week's episode where Dr. Fiona's question will be answered by my next guest. Until then, thanks for listening.